Good afternoon. What a pleasure it is to be back at Rail Wellbeing live for what is now my third year in a row, bringing to you some different content this year. I am Caitriona O'Brien, Safety Improvement Specialist in Network Rail's Technical Authority. And I wear a couple of other hats in the industry. The last couple of years I have been presenting here on conversations about grief because I run the rail industry bereavement support group. But today I'm here very much in my technical capacity to speak to you about fatigue and road risk. These are two passion projects of mine, despite being my regular bread and butter work. One of the reasons being that my family has experienced road traffic fatalities. Both my granddad and his eldest son, my uncle, lost their lives in road traffic collisions. In fact, both were pedestrians who had a collision with a road traffic vehicle. And so for me, it makes road risk something that is very, very close to home. It also makes me want to land lessons with people, I think, without them having to experience the really awful consequences, I guess, of what happens and what families experience when there is a fatal road traffic collision or even a life-changing injury as a result of a road traffic collision. So I mentioned that my other main work stream is fatigue management, and since I joined the Technical Authority team almost 2 years ago now, this is the main project that I've been leading. It is no small challenge for the rail industry. In fact, it is probably one of our most difficult challenges to try and make the approach to fatigue management consistent and coherent across the industry. Not least because fatigue is such a personal thing and generic approaches don't work for everybody. So today we're combining the two, and I want to bring to you a project that is a particular pride of mine in terms of its outputs and the work that we have done on it, and that is Drive Safe. So Drive Safe is our, at Network Rail, programme of road safety messaging, and all of the content for Drive Safe is available on our Safety Hub, on Safety Central, and it's available to everybody. You do not have to work at Network Rail to access this. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why we put the content there, was so that everybody could find and see the toolkits that we have developed to facilitate these conversations. One of the biggest parts of Drive Safe as a programme is called Sleepiness is Serious. And we developed Sleepiness is Serious because it really is time to talk about managing fatigue at the point where it meets one of our greatest risks, which is our road risk. So in rail, typically about 21% of all of our high potential accidents and incidents. Now that's not just on the road, that's all of our high potential incidents cite fatigue or lack of alertness as a causal factor. And that is very much mirrored in road risk statistics, both in the rail industry and outside of it. Between 20 to 25% of road traffic collisions have fatigue or lack of alertness as a causal factor. This is a good point, I think, to address the difference between fatigue and reduced alertness. Fatigue is defined, kind of clinically defined or defined as a word, as a physiological state of reduced alertness, but also, you know, a combination of tiredness, of environmental factors, kind of leading into exhaustion. So it's a state that encompasses our physical and mental selves, our ability to react, our ability to think. Reduced alertness is the way that our battery drains kind of throughout the course of a 24-hour period, or the space between time that we sleep. It is quite common that we will enter and exit states of reduced alertness at numerous points over the course of a 24-hour period, as our body clock works, as we eat and exercise and rest and do various things. Our alertness-o-meter, if you like, increases and decreases. Critically, for road risk, a driver who has been awake for 17 plus hours has twice the normal risk of collision in a road vehicle. Now, 17 hours, you think that sounds like a long time. If you're working a 12-hour shift and you consider that, at the point of finishing that shift, when you're considering driving home, if you've been awake for just 5 hours before that shift, then that is the point at which, you've been awake for 17 hours, and it builds up quite quickly. In the rail industry overall, we take a zero tolerance approach to drugs and alcohol. So, there are no circumstances under which being intoxicated with drugs or alcohol are acceptable on the railway. However, what we don't talk about very much is the fact that at 18 hours of wakefulness, for most people, and again, please, take the caveat that in this conversation, when I talk about most people, I'm talking about, people of average health, typically neurotypical, because there are things about how neurodivergent brains work that make circadian rhythms quite different and so on. But for most people, at 18 hours of wakefulness, our brain performance is equivalent to how it would be if we were at the drink drive limit in England and Wales. So that's a blood alcohol content of 0.08%. So effectively, how you would be acting after a couple of pints plus or a couple of drinks. Now, from a road risk perspective, that is extraordinarily dangerous if we are at the point where we also have that reduced alertness. Our decision-making capability is reduced. And obviously then when we get to the point of being awake for 24 hours, we are 7 times more likely to have a road traffic collision. We've seen the consequences of this throughout the rail industry, very sadly, in a number of very serious fatalities over the last decade. Imagine driving blindfolded on a busy motorway. It's a concept almost that you would balk at, and think that it would be the most extraordinary risk. Well, that's what happens in effect when you drift into a microsleep. Microsleeps don't typically give us any warning. They happen when we are at a point of reduced alertness, when the brain perceives an opportunity to grab a sleep, and it happens without any kind of conscious decision on our part. At 56 miles per hour, a van travels 25 meters a second. So a 2-second microsleep means that we are traveling blind for 50 meters. And if you look at the history of some of our most serious incidents, our road risk incidents, you will see that this particular scenario has had deadly consequences, where we have had drivers suffer a microsleep at the wheel of a vehicle, either on their own or with passengers, and end up colliding with, typically on a nighttime journey, typically a HGV is the most common outcome. Sadly. And when we have that microsleep, we are not in control of the vehicle. We are not even in control of our own body. And we are actually in stage 1 sleep. We can't really talk about fatigue and alertness without talking about sleep or why we sleep. So I'm not going to put myself forward here as a sleep expert particularly. It is a field of interest of mine. I have done some courses and some learning on it, but I think it's important that every individual knows really the basics in order to be able to manage and understand how your sleep cycle works. Your natural sleep-wake cycle is dictated by your internal clock, and that internal clock is called your circadian rhythm. We have had a circadian rhythm since time immemorial. Since we were back in the cave, our brains have worked in a way that has made us want to be awake when it is light and be productive, and want to be asleep when it is dark. How it does that is that it uses the interpretation of light through our eyes to produce a hormone called melatonin. When melatonin increases, our sleep drive increases. So effectively, the less light that we perceive, the more melatonin we produce, and the more that we want to sleep. As that sleep drive increases, our alertness reduces. So it's a balancing act constantly. Things like movement and exercise can restore some of that alertness. But typically, the longer you're awake without a period of sleep, the higher your sleep drive is going to become, regardless of day or night periods. There are lots of external factors that affect that sleep drive as well, because of the way that our hormones typically work. So as we age, our sleep drive suffers the consequences. Hormone imbalances, things like menopause and andropause, chronic illnesses, for example, things like fibromyalgia, MS, or other fatigue-related conditions. These can all have an impact on our circadian rhythm and our sleep drive, and in fact our ability to get restorative sleep. There are also two kind of pitfalls in every 24-hour period for us, two natural slumps in our circadian rhythm, known as windows of circadian low, or WOCLs. If you have anything to do with fatigue management, you'll be aware of the WOCL. So this is where our sleep drive hits a peak over a point in the day or night, and we see those peaks typically between 2 and 5 in the afternoon, when a lot of our European neighbours go off and have a siesta to take advantage of that, and in the morning between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. In the morning. So a particular window of increased risk for anyone undertaking a road journey in the early hours of the morning. So why does any of this matter? Why does sleep matter? I think in our modern society, that makes me sound very old, but with the availability of social media and mobile phones and the expectation of working on call, the fact that life is almost 24/7 now, it almost makes sleep feel like kind of cheating. That it's reduced in importance. Well, actually, it absolutely hasn't. If anything, it has increased in importance because of the amount of constant information we're getting throughout our waking period, the demands on us to be present in multiple places via phone, the demand on us to be responsible and answering pings and emails and, aware of things going on around us. Sleep is probably more important than ever. I've mentioned sleep drive. The only thing that can reset our sleep drive back to an acceptable level and reset our alertness is to get some sleep. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Hormone control specifically happens as we sleep, and it means that for women, we need a little bit more sleep than men. Typically, again, I can't speak for everyone, but in general, women need that little bit more sleep. All of our critical hormones, so those that control stress levels, things like adrenaline and cortisol, everything that controls our reproductive system, so testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, all of these hormones are regulated while we sleep. And in order for that regulation to happen, we have to hit a certain level and quantity of sleep. If that regulation doesn't happen, we end up with hormone imbalances in our adrenals, in our stress hormones, in even the hormones that control our heart health, things like our blood pressure. That all has to do with getting that lovely balance of sleep. So it has such significant impact for our wider health and our well-being. Very critically in stage 4 sleep, and this is what a typical 8-hour sleep cycle looks like in terms of stages. So along the left-hand side here, you can see that we go from being awake down through stages into stage 4 sleep, where that blue colour is kind of at its darkest. In that stage 4 sleep, a process called glymphatic cleaning or glymphatic process happens. Glymphatic cleaning is effectively where our brain washes down the walls of everything that it has absorbed and heard and dealt with throughout our waking period, and effectively resets. So glymphatic process helps to reduce plaques that build up in our brain in the same way that they do in our heart when we have cardiac disease or coronary heart disease. In order to make sure that those plaques are cleaned away and that our brain health is good, we need to make sure that we are getting good quality and quantity of sleep, that we are hitting this stage 4 sleep. That can be really challenging to do if you have a lot going on in your household or in the place that you sleep, because effectively you have to move through all of those earlier stages to get into stage 4 sleep to begin with. So that means that you have to get through those lighter stages where you are more likely to be woken up by noise, by people moving about your house, and so on and so forth. You'll also see that over the course of that 8-hour cycle, our need for stage 4 sleep reduces, and we end up having slightly more REM sleep towards the end of that pattern. So each cycle, and typically a cycle of going from being awake into stage 4 or deep sleep and back up to stage 1, those cycles typically are kind of 90 to 110 minutes, depending on the individual. And it's quite common to actually wake a little between those cycles for your brain to check that everything in the environment is okay. We will notice that more if we're staying in, for example, hotel accommodation, where we're not used to the environs. We'll kind of feel that we wake more throughout that period of trying to sleep well. But typically, we do actually wake at the end of a cycle and then resume heading back through the stages again. But we will notice that more if our environs are different, because our brain is just checking. Effectively, it's the cave brain checking that there aren't any tigers or bears encroaching upon the cave entrance. That's the reason ultimately for our brain to be programmed that way. So where you sleep really makes a difference. Quite often people will say that they sleep best on a night shift in an armchair, in a room, for example, that is quiet. Again, the science points to the fact that in order to get into that nice deep stage 4 sleep, we do need to be in an environment where we can relax our muscles fully, and that typically doesn't happen when you're in a sitting position. So we need to be able to lie down, and we need to be able to lie down comfortably. And we need to be able to do that in an environment where our brain feels safe. So, quite often, while you might feel like a nap in an emergency environment will be good quality sleep, it might do the job in an emergency, but it won't be that nice deep level of sleep critically that we need. The advice always is to invest in your sleep. So a good quality mattress, good quality bedding, blackout blinds or curtains, particularly if you have to sleep in the day, to minimize that light that we mentioned that might stop our melatonin production. My dad always said, have the best mattress and the best shoe, the best footwear that you can afford, because if you're not in one, you're in the other. And certainly that plays true for, making an investment in your bed and your comfort situation for where it is that you're actually going to sleep. Keep the bedroom for sleep and sex. When we enter our sleep environment, we want our brain to think that one of two things are going to happen. That is either going to be sleep or sexual relations. We don't want our brain to be worrying when we enter the bedroom that it might have to do some work or open a laptop. We want that programming to be there, that your brain recognizes your environment as, somewhere where ultimately there is going to be a relaxing environment. Your room temperature should be kept low. I know that some people feel like they need to be very warm to sleep. Actually, your core body temperature needs to drop a couple of degrees in order to be able to get into that good quality sleep. So keeping your room temperature a little lower is best practice there. Light control we've mentioned. So again, whether you are a day sleeper or a night sleeper, try to keep as much light as possible out of your sleep environment, because that also goes actually for your phones and devices. Don't have your mobile phone or a tablet up near your face, because that blue light emission will stop your melatonin production and you'll find it harder to get to sleep. That ends up always in a bit of a vicious cycle of feeling like you can't sleep, and therefore getting on your phone to while away some time. Certainly it is not good. Once your eyes are perceiving light, your melatonin production is reducing or ultimately stopping. On call is a difficult challenge, and it is a challenge that I have had so many conversations with individuals across the rail industry on, because so many of us work on call and there are so many different types of on call that we work in the industry. It's really difficult here to give some good guidance, apart from asking you, if you work on call, to be aware of something called sleep inertia. So sleep inertia is something that can mean that we are as dangerous waking up from sleep as we can be if we are falling asleep. And a really good case to read to see the potential consequences of sleep inertia is the Air India Flight 8112 in 2010. Which is where a pilot had a lengthy sleep throughout the course of a flight, and in being woken was unable to rouse himself sufficiently to be able to conduct a safe landing. And there were in fact 158 fatalities. So I really recommend it as a good read. If you are in the deeper stages of sleep when you are woken up, say you are woken up by your mobile, or even by a noise while you're on call, you will experience sleep inertia for up to about 20 minutes. So this is why it's a critical practice to be able to accept a call and say, I was in deep sleep, I'm going to need a few minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, to be able to safely make a decision, or to be able to safely go and drive my vehicle somewhere if that's what you want me to do as on call. It's really important to take that time before you make a knee-jerk decision without thinking about it, because sleep inertia is a combination of brain fog, reduced mobility, kind of muscle slowness, as we try and get our brain back from that deep sleep. The last one, and I think it's such a recurring theme throughout almost all of the Rail Wellbeing live sessions, certainly anything that I've seen today, and those that come up throughout the course of the week, the ability to talk, to be able to have a conversation with somebody about what's going on with you is so important. And quite often having these conversations with the people we share our house and our life with can actually be really difficult, because we know that the restrictions that are being put on us by our shift work or by our on call have an impact on the people with whom we share our life, our home. So to be able to have conversations with a spouse, for example, about the sleeping arrangements when you're on shift, particularly if you're on opposite shifts, or you're going to be on a schedule where one of you disturbs the other from getting good quality sleep, then it's really important just to have a conversation about what you can best do to minimize the effect on the other. And while it might seem like a challenging thing to do to begin with, it is a very caring thing to do, to want to protect the sleep of your spouse in the long run, or your partner, whomever you share your living arrangements with, because in the long run, getting better quality sleep will not just improve their health and well-being, it will also improve their mood, their general happiness, and ultimately their lifespan as well. So for night shift workers particularly, or those who work intermittent nights, there are some good tips. Now, obviously, we know that night shift is a difficult shift to manage. We know that it has negative consequences for your health. We also know that the rail industry is one that is very unlikely to step away from needing night shift workers for a very long time, because of the way that access to the railway works. So if you think then about what I mentioned earlier about sleep cycles being 90 to 110 minutes in length, and the fact that they recommend that you get 5 of these cycles over the course of a 24-hour period, they don't have to be back to back. You don't have to try and plan in 8 hours sleep as a block. You can try and plan in 3 hours sleep as your initial block as soon as you get home from completing your night shift. Because in that first, that's kind of the first one is the critical one, where we get the most deep stage 4 sleep. If you could make that one a priority, and I know that's really challenging because a lot of us who work nights have childcare duties, have to get people to and from school, and so on and so forth. But that initial cycle is ever so important, and prioritizing that cycle is a benefit, certainly if you are going to be working the night shift on a regular basis. So light exposure we have spoken about. If you could wear sunglasses on the way home, if you're driving home from your shift, for example, be careful that they're not so dark that they break the DVLA rules about what you are and aren't allowed to wear, but minimize your exposure to daylight before you try and get that first good period of sleep. If you are somebody who likes to shop on Amazon, install a parcel bin, or if you can't do that, make arrangements with neighbours so that you can have your parcels delivered elsewhere and you're not either waiting up for a parcel delivery, because we know that rarely happens on time, or being disturbed by somebody knocking with a parcel. Putting those kind of proactive things in place can be really helpful. Use all the tools that people tell you are available. So good quality eye masks, sleep headbands that might be able to play you soft music as well as block out light. There are apps on phones that you can use. I tend to use Calm quite a bit to tell me railway stories, I know. But they are certainly, very useful, particularly for helping you back to sleep. Again, just be careful about your phone placement and the tendency to pick it up and have a wee scroll. And then time your last sleep. So I mentioned about breaking it up. Time your last sleep to be as close to your next shift start as possible, or as practicable, allowing you obviously to get a meal in and make sure that you're not in that sleep inertia, but also bearing in mind that the alertness meter starts again at the end of your last period of sleep. If you are somebody who likes to work out, it can vary for individuals, but to align with your circadian rhythm and recognize the fact that working out raises stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, doing a workout before a night shift is typically more productive. You'll get a better workout, but also better alertness on your night shift than if you try and do it between the end of your shift and your morning sleep. And then there are so many sessions on nutrition. I won't go into it in huge detail, but typically if you can keep your meals light over the course of late or night shifts, can be really challenging, especially with the availability of, the types of food that you can actually get. But where you can, if you're a night shift worker, eat your main meal before your shift, so your heaviest meal before you actually start. And then balance things like complex carbs, protein, and healthy fats to keep you fuller longer. Then before you go for that first period of good sleep, eat a light meal only. You don't want to be trying to, get some sleep and have your metabolism slow when you've got a really full stomach. Obviously, whole foods, low sugar snacks every 3 to 4 hours will help you maintain energy. There are lots of conversations in the sleep or fatigue management space about caffeine. Caffeine typically isn't the solution, and it certainly won't reset your alertness in the way that a lot of people feel that it might, especially if you are neurodivergent. So I have ADHD. Caffeine does not work on me in the same way that it does on neurotypical people. If anything, it makes me quite sleepy. And watch out for something like postprandial sleepiness. If you eat a heavy meal, it's very likely that you will have that post-lunch slump afterwards. So be aware, if you're about to go on a long journey and you stop at the services, try not to have a very heavy meal that will sit in your stomach and cause you to have that postprandial sleepiness, that post-lunch slump. Hydration, obviously, is key. I say obviously because you're going to hear it over and over, I think, throughout Rail Wellbeing Live and in pretty much every toolbox talk that you might have across the rail industry. Microsleeps don't come with a warning, they just happen. You will have up to 11 microsleeps behind the wheel of a vehicle before you realise that you've had one. So before you take a long journey, you can use this chart. And if you're familiar with the Karolinska Sleepiness Scale, you may have seen this chart in reverse elsewhere. But it's a really simple scale from 1 to 9 that really shows you when you're too tired to drive or too tired ultimately to do any kind of safety critical task. Starting up at 1, extremely alert, you've had great quality sleep over a number of periods, and perhaps you've had, a double espresso, you've had your breakfast, you're raring to go. That is where we are, ding, 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 best quality of alertness. Ultimately, then the spectrum, the drop that will happen over the course of our hours of awakeness goes through being very alert, into being experiencing the signs of sleepiness. And at that point where we start to experience the signs of sleepiness, which should hopefully be, if we've planned our shift well, at the point where we are coming to the end of our shift, then we need to be very mindful that the next phase, so number 7, is where we are experiencing symptoms of sleepiness. Now, this is at the point where we are too tired to drive. And if you take any message away with you today, it is this: it is okay to say, I am too tired to drive. If you're the only person in the vehicle, then obviously there's no point saying it to yourself. It's time to raise a concern to a line manager or a controller, an on-call manager, somebody to whom you can escalate an issue to say, I am not safe to continue this journey and we need to put something in place for my safety. So if nothing else, if you can think before you take any journey, think, am I alert enough to undertake this whole journey? Or am I likely to experience a drop in alertness over the course of the journey that will get me to that point of number 7? This then leads us to journey planning. So before we undertake any journey, and as our work is being planned, we should be looking at, is this a journey that I make regularly? Am I fit to drive this whole journey? What type of task am I undertaking prior to being the nominated driver for this? So have I got a particularly physical workload, for example? All the vehicle checks, obviously, and everything else are done. The vehicle is confirmed as roadworthy. And then we have a route plan. In this route plan, we need to be looking at appropriate services or stops that we can make where we can take a break, maybe get a drink or something to eat, but ultimately where we can break the journey, swap drivers if needs be. And if we have to, if we are at the point of experiencing that critical reduced alertness with no alternative option but to move to to drive onward to a services or a hotel, the key message that comes from Driving for Better Business and our sleep consultants in the industry is to pull up your vehicle somewhere safe. If possible, and if caffeine helps you with alertness, bear in mind, as I said, if you're not neurotypical, that may not be the case, to have either an energy drink or some strong coffee, and then secure your vehicle and take a 20-minute nap. No longer than 20 minutes, because that might get you into that deeper stage sleep. And then once you're at the end of that nap, come around, take a little walk outside your vehicle, and then carry on your journey, making sure that it is as short as possible from that point. Just looking at the time, I think that we will go to some questions. I did have a couple more slides, but I think I've been slower than usual. And I want to make sure that we do get to some of them. So thank you everyone who has joined this session. And thank you for your questions. So let's have a look. For someone with a chronic health condition that doesn't tend to get deep sleep, what tips can you give, please? So with chronic health conditions, you need really to understand the effect that your health condition has on you and how that impacts on your sleep. A really great resource for finding good quality information, but also with the option of a help desk that has no charge, is a group called the Sleep Charity. Now, the Sleep Charity have a help desk number that you can call for free advice on how to manage sleep issues. They have done an enormous amount of research around things like chronic illnesses, insomnia, sleep apnea, and as mentioned, some of the other sleep disorders. So certainly they are an excellent resource. Ultimately, I think if you are a sufferer of a chronic condition and regularly tasked with driving duties for work, it's really important to have a fatigue management plan in place so that you've had a conversation with a line manager or somebody who can make a safe decision for you if you get to the point of reduced alertness where you're not fit to make that decision for yourself. Hey Kat, I fall asleep no problem, but I tend to wake in the early hours around 3 a.m. and have a mare trying to get back to sleep. This, yes, a very common problem. I will make no assumptions, commenter, about your age, but this typically tends to happen more as we age. We are quite often woken either by our bladder or, as I mentioned, that kind of primate brain telling us to check our environment. The key, I think, when that happens is to make sure that at the point where we do wake at 3 a.m., that firstly, we don't get too het up or too stressed about the fact that it has happened again, because that can instantly put us into a spiral of worrying that we're not going to get back to sleep. But then only spend 20 minutes lying there trying to get back to sleep. Use something along the lines of a pillow spray. It could be lavender scented. That might help your brain to relax. I use a mister, which I have a little remote control for, that will just turn on a relaxing scent in my room. Again, that just helps my brain kind of settle back. I also, as I mentioned, use apps like Calm or Headspace, which have back to sleep sessions that will run for a number of minutes and try and get you back into sleep. If you haven't gotten back to sleep within 20 minutes, what is recommended is that you actually get out of your bed, take a gentle walk, in a place that is safe to do so. Don't turn on too many lights. You obviously don't want to wake your brain up too much. But just take a gentle walk outside of that sleep environment. Maybe sit in low light and read a little, or just have a few minutes to be mindful. Think perhaps about what's on your mind, and then after 15 minutes, go back and try to resume your sleep again. If you find that you're waking at 3 a.m. persistently and you've got bad habits like putting the telly on or scrolling on your phone, then I would recommend, again, make a call to your GP to see if there's something underlying there, or to the sleep charity to see if they can give you some broader advice as well. In our industry, if someone feels tired or reports fatigue, we often get the fatigue index checked, and if acceptable, that's often all we can do. What can we do as an industry to help frontline workers? That's a really excellent question, thank you. I think we have become over-reliant on the fatigue index. So what the comment is mentioning here is the HSE's FRI, Fatigue Risk Index, which is a critical part of the Network Rail standard for managing fatigue, which looks at the hours that you work and makes a calculation about what level of fatigue you are likely to experience if the FRI is at a certain score. Now, typically, if the FRI shows, say, 35, which is just a number output, that means that 35% of the workforce on shift are likely to mark themselves an 8 or a 9 on the Karolinska scale that we saw earlier. It's quite a high risk. But what it doesn't do is give an indication of the other factors that an individual might have to experience to mark themselves as that 8 or 9. So I think culturally, we need to step away from this kind of critical focus on those output numbers and recognise that they're only one part of the fatigue risk management system. The FRI is just one calculation. It's like your number of hours that you've spent in bed isn't an indication of the number of hours sleep that you've had or the quality of sleep that you've had. So learning to have conversations about the other demands that are on you, your stress levels, your nutrition, your ongoing kind of physical health and mental health, as well as that bigger picture then of, the likely effect of your hours of work. That's a good way to start to support people better. And a way to do that is a tool called a fatigue management plan. I'm more than happy, if anybody wants to contact me about the FRI or about fatigue management plans, you can do so on cwsafety@networkrail.co.uk. That's CW Charlie Whiskey Safety, all one word, at networkrail.co.uk. Can you talk more about how neurodiversity impacts circadian rhythms? I've never heard this before. I would love to, but we don't have time to go into the science of it today. So with neurodivergence, your brain patterns are different. It's like you're on a different operating model. And typically in people with ADHD or autism, for example, and I do say typically because it's not one size fits all, you'll find that there is a circadian shift. So those of you who are listening with neurodivergent teenagers, you'll find that they typically stay awake a lot longer and want to sleep a lot later in the day. Those of us with those kind of neurotypes typically will find that we are very much night owls, that we want to be awake for longer. And the science goes that that brain programming is one of the reasons why that's the case. Certainly, again, more than happy to go into it in more detail if you want to get in touch with me, and we can talk about that separately. Can you talk about the link between stress and fatigue? Absolutely. So, as a very kind of light touch, when we are stressed, our body is in fight or flight mode. And in fight or flight mode, we tend to suppress the things that our brain doesn't think are critical within that moment. Things like our libido, our metabolism, because if we're going to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or hit by a train imminently, because our brain can't tell the difference between an oncoming train and a critical email from a manager, it's all just perceived as threat. Remember, your brain doesn't have language. Once that threat is perceived, our adrenaline goes up, our cortisol goes up, our body's getting ready to either run away from the danger or stay and fight it. So whether the threat, as I say, is small or large, our body's doing the same thing. If we have persistent fatigue, that is, that we are not getting good quality sleep and we're not getting into that good glymphatic process, that means that we are not reducing our cortisol and adrenaline levels appropriately. Sleep resets those to an acceptable level. Good quality sleep does, and I have to emphasize the quality. That glymphatic process helps us into rest and digest, helps our metabolism to work, helps that adrenaline and that cortisol to reduce to acceptable levels, and therefore starts us off after we've had good quality sleep with good beginning levels again of stress hormones. That's it in a very teeny nutshell. But again, I have whole sessions that I can deliver on those topics, and I'm more than happy if you want to get in touch with me to do so, to deliver them with you. Is there any initiative to bring an improved version of the fatigue index / risk calculator provided previously by HSE, perhaps with a version for those not rostered? So within Network Rail, certainly I have been tasked with rewriting the fatigue management standard. And yes, as part of that process, we are looking at alternatives to the HSE FRI. The reason being, obviously, it was a tool that was developed many, many years ago, before we have had all of the change and understanding, I guess, that we've gone through in the industry over the last decades. So yes, we are certainly looking to alternative models. We actually work quite broadly as well with some of the universities who are doing work around shift work and about biomathematical modelling, which is what the FRI is, to understand whether we can develop something very specific for the rail industry as well. Excellent talk, thank you. Please could I suggest this for a safety brief topic to share more widely with colleagues? Alan Martin, National Records Group. Absolutely, Alan. I have lots of short sessions that I can share with you. That is not a problem. I will take a screenshot and do my best to make sure to get in touch with you. Also, though, as I say, if you want to pop me an email to Kat or Caitriona at cwsafety at networkrail.co.uk, or you'll even find me if you're internal to Network Rail on the system. Goodness, 45 minutes goes so quickly. We sometimes work long days on site and then have the option to drive home, e.g. 6-hour drive back, or to get a hotel. I rely on others to drive, and they often choose to drive even after a very long day. Is there a maximum shift that you would recommend before undertaking a long drive like this, usually in the evening? So for a 6-hour drive, given that we have a 14-hour door-to-door policy, I would certainly be questioning whether your team is the right team to be responding for a 6-hour drive. That seems an extraordinary, amount to have to drive. And certainly my recommendation would be to take hotel accommodation there and to divide up the drive as best as possible. A maximum shift with a 6-hour drive, it seems really impractical. I would actually like to speak to you on that one. If you find that, I'm hoping that's 3 hours there and back, but if it's 6 hours in one direction, that's certainly something that we could have a chat about. So I do apologise. We have run out of time. I know that there were plenty more questions in the mix there. As I say, I'm always happy to come and speak to you, your team, your business, on anything that is to do with Drive Safe. You can find the content on Safety Central, or to do with fatigue management, especially as we go into our standard change process. It's really important for me to hear how fatigue management affects you across the rail industry. As a last note, I recommend Dr. Joshua Kavor's session tomorrow morning. If you're partaking in Rail Wellbeing Live tomorrow morning, 9 a.m, wake up to better sleep, as a way to carry on from this message. Thank you so much for your time.